The moment Shedeur Sanders stepped back onto that field with Cleveland's first-team offense, everything shifted. 2 straight days, Deshaun Watson had been running with the ones, grinding through reps in a practice environment specifically designed to favor his strengths. Lighter contact, fewer variables, pure rhythm. And then Sanders got his shot back, rolling left, throwing right, finding receivers in spaces that shouldn't have existed, reminding everyone watching that this competition was far from decided. Within minutes of getting live reps against starting-caliber defenders, he made the entire offense look sharp, made it look effortless. The kind of performance that changes how people talk about what's actually happening in Cleveland right now. The kind of day that forces everyone paying attention to reconsider their assumptions about who's really winning this quarterback battle. Because what happened on day 11 of Browns training camp wasn't just another practice performance. It was a statement. And it's exactly what we're breaking down today. Section 1, the framework and context, 900 words. Before we get into the specifics of what happened on that field, we need to establish the bigger picture first. Because honestly, context changes everything when you're trying to understand what these reps actually mean. When you're evaluating a quarterback competition in training camp, you can't just look at individual throws in isolation. You have to understand the structure that's being built around it. You have to know what the coaches are trying to accomplish. You have to understand the timeline. And right now, at the Browns facility, that timeline is pretty clearly defined. Head coach Todd Monken has already laid out the framework for how this quarterback competition is going to work moving forward, and it's important to understand because it shapes everything about how we should interpret what we're seeing day to day. Each quarterback is scheduled to start one of the first 2 preseason games. That's the baseline. That's non-negotiable. But there's still some fluidity around joint practices against Buffalo and how those reps get divided up when you're not in a traditional game setting. The coaching staff is essentially still mapping out the exact rotation, but the expectation is crystal clear. Once both quarterbacks get their preseason starts, a much clearer picture is supposed to emerge about who's actually winning this thing. That's what everyone's working within right now. That's the framework that matters. Now here's what's important about this structure. It's designed to give both quarterbacks meaningful opportunities to prove themselves in game-like situations. That's the theory anyway. The reality is that training camp rep distribution can become incredibly politicized. It can become a referendum on who the coaching staff actually favors, whether they mean for it to be or not. And the way reps get distributed, who gets the first-team reps, who gets pulled back when they get reinserted, all of that sends messages. Sometimes intentional messages, sometimes unintentional ones, but messages nonetheless. What happened leading into today is actually worth examining through that lens. Sanders had been pulled back from first-team reps while Watson got an extended run. 2 days straight, which included a no-pads practice. And this matters. The no-pads environment is specifically the kind of controlled setting where Watson has historically looked most comfortable throughout his entire career. Lighter contact means fewer variables. Fewer variables means more rhythm. More rhythm means the offense clicks better. That's Watson's preferred terrain. That's where he traditionally shines. That's not speculation or bias. That's just factual observation about how his game works best. The timing of pulling Sanders back, the duration of Watson's extended run, and the specific decision to have Sanders return in a no-pads setting. All of it creates a particular narrative, whether you mean for it to or not. It creates the narrative that Watson is being positioned as the starter. It creates the narrative that the competition is leaning in a particular direction. It creates the narrative that opportunity is being distributed strategically rather than evenly. And whether that's actually true or not, perception in football matters. How reps get distributed matters. Who gets the favorable circumstances matters. But here's what's fascinating about today specifically. Even stepping into what should have been disadvantageous circumstances, even facing the situation that was stacked in a particular way, Sanders came out and had what most objective people watching would honestly call a genuinely dominant day. He was decisive early. He was decisive often, and the tape backs up every bit of it. He didn't just have good moments. He had a pattern of good moments. He didn't just convert a few throws. He converted consistently. And that's actually the more important story here. Because when a young quarterback goes up against unfavorable conditions and still performs at a high level, that tells you something. It tells you he's not just a product of system or situation. It tells you he's not just playing well because everything is set up in his favor. It tells you there's legitimate talent there that's going to show up regardless of circumstances. And when you combine that with the competitive dynamic, with the fact that he's going up against Deshaun Watson, a legitimately accomplished NFL quarterback, then what we're seeing starts to paint a different picture than what some of the narrative has been suggesting. The framework matters. The context matters. Who's running with the ones, who's pulling back, how long they get extended runs, all of it matters. But what matters most is what actually happens when the lights are on and the competition is real. And what happened today was a genuinely impressive performance. Not just impressive relative to expectations or impressive relative to other practice days. Genuinely impressive in terms of decision-making, accuracy, and the ability to process a complex offense at speed. That's the real takeaway from understanding the context of Day 11. The circumstances were set up in a particular way, and Sanders performed anyway. Section 2. The anticipation THROWS and elite processing, 900 words. Let's talk about a specific throw that matters more than it might initially appear to someone just glancing at a stat sheet. This one went to Isaiah Bond, and I want to walk through exactly why this rep matters beyond just being another completed pass in the completion percentage column. Because there's a difference between a throw that works and a throw that demonstrates elite-level processing and decision-making. This throw does both. This is anticipation thrown at an elite level. That's the technical term for it, and it's one of the most important reads scouts look for in young quarterbacks. Sanders is already committing to release before Bond has even fully come out of his break, before the receiver is even through his route, before the defender has fully reacted. This isn't a checkdown where the quarterback is taking what the defense gives him. This isn't a quarterback reacting after the fact and fitting a ball into a tight window because he had to. This is a young quarterback trusting the timing of the route so completely that he's already delivering before the window is even fully open. He's operating on faith in the system. Faith that his receiver is going to be exactly where the offense designed him to be. Faith that the timing is going to work out. And faith that he should let it rip. That's the exact kind of throw that gets questioned early in a prospect's career. That's what skeptics point to when they ask if a young quarterback is really seeing the field or just relying on rote memorization. Because it's a thin line between anticipation and gambling. It's a thin line between trusting your system and being reckless. And what separates the two is consistency. One-off flash plays don't mean anything. One great throw in one practice doesn't change the evaluation. But when you start to see a pattern, when you start to see a young quarterback making these kinds of decisions repeatedly, across multiple days, in multiple situations, then you're looking at something real. Then you're looking at skill rather than luck. And here's the thing, Sanders has been showing this repeatedly across this camp, not as some one-off flash play that stands out because everything else is mediocre. Not as a lucky moment that gets overshadowed by inconsistency, but as a consistent pattern. A repeated demonstration that he processes the offense at a level most people frankly weren't expecting this early in his professional career. That matters. That changes the conversation. The anticipation throw is important because it's a quarterback skill that doesn't show up in stat lines. It doesn't show up in completion percentage. You can complete 65% of your throws and look like a game manager, or you can complete 65% of your throws and look like an elite prospect. The difference is in the throws you choose to make and the decisions that go into them. The anticipation throw is a decision that says, I trust this system enough to let it go. I understand what's happening pre-snap well enough to commit before the play fully develops. I'm not scared to let the ball fly. Now let's expand on the bigger picture of his processing, because the anticipation throw is just one element of what was impressive today. There's a rep where Sanders identified something at the line of scrimmage and completely changed the play call into a different route. That's pre-snap recognition. That's a young quarterback standing over center, reading the defense, understanding what the defensive coordinator is trying to do, and having the confidence and knowledge to switch into a better play. Then, he delivered an accurate ball just out of the defender's reach. That's not just making a throw. That's making a throw in the context of a completely adjusted play call. Pre-snap adjustment is actually one of the most underrated aspects of quarterback evaluation, because any quarterback can throw accurately when the play is designed perfectly. Any quarterback can complete a pass when they're just executing what was called. But the quarterback who can see a defensive look and understand what it means, who can change the play to take advantage of it, who can then execute the new play accurately, that's a different level. That's a quarterback who's not just reacting. He's anticipating. He's thinking ahead. He's playing chess while the defense is trying to play checkers. And I want to bring in some outside perspective here, because I don't want this to just be me hyping up what I'm seeing in a vacuum with my own bias. There's a respected voice on local radio, someone who's actually been critical of Sanders at different points during this camp, someone who's not afraid to call out weaknesses when they see them. And that person specifically pointed out today that Sanders' offense processing was extremely clean. They highlighted that pre-snap adjustment. They highlighted the accurate delivery that followed. They acknowledged the quality of the decision-making that went into it. When someone who's been openly skeptical starts acknowledging strong fundamentals on a given day, that carries real weight. It's not coming from an obviously biased source trying to promote a narrative. It's coming from someone who's been willing to call out weaknesses when they see them. And if that voice is saying the processing was clean, if they're acknowledging the pre-snap recognition, then you're looking at something that transcends just one person's opinion. You're looking at something that's actually visible on tape if you watch it critically. Section 3, Ball Placement and Decision-Making, 900 words. Let's break down the connection with Casey conception, because there's a rep here worth real detailed analysis. This is the kind of play that doesn't get highlighted in most practice breakdowns, but it's exactly the kind of rep that separates genuinely good quarterbacks from great ones. This is where the real evaluation happens. Conception put a defender on the ground with his route work. He ran a route that forced a clean missed tackle attempt at the top of the pattern. The defender couldn't hang with him. The route was clean. The footwork was sharp. He created separation. Now, at this point, Sanders could have done several things. He could have thrown a quick slant and gotten the ball out fast. He could have checked it down. He could have looked to another receiver. Those are all legitimate options. But what Sanders actually did was something more sophisticated. He saw his receiver had room and time, and he made a deliberate choice about where to actually place that football. Instead of throwing it out toward the sideline, which would have been the easier throw, the safer throw, the throw that limits risk, Sanders let conception work underneath the ball. He threw it with touch and placement that allowed his receiver to actually turn his body and get vertical with real space in front of him. That's not a quarterback just getting a completion. That's a quarterback thinking about what happens after the catch. What happens when conception gets the ball? What happens when the defense has to come up and make a decision? Where can this receiver run with the ball if I put it in the right spot? That's the kind of subtlety that most people watching in real time don't necessarily catch. That's not a highlight reel throw. That's not a perfect spiral that makes everyone go, wow. That's a quiet, intelligent decision about ball placement that goes way beyond just getting the pass completed. The difference in yardage between throwing it out to the sideline and letting conception work underneath is maybe 5 yards in the moment. But over the course of a season, over the course of multiple drives, over the course of years of playing football at the highest level, that's the difference between an average quarterback and an elite one. This is exactly the kind of process detail that scouts and coaching staffs specifically look for in young quarterbacks. It's not just about arm talent. It's not just about athleticism. It's about understanding how the game works. It's about thinking 3 steps ahead. It's about realizing that your job isn't just to complete a throw. Your job is to put your offense in the best position to succeed. Your job is to make plays that help your team win games, not just plays that look good on SportsCenter highlights. The conception throw is also relevant because it shows something else about Sanders' development. It shows that he's not just relying on athleticism. He's not just throwing off-platform and making plays happen through sheer physical ability. He's thinking, he's processing. He's making decisions that are informed by understanding of what the offense is trying to accomplish. That's the stuff that separates a prospect from a professional quarterback. Now, let's also talk about what this means in the broader context of the competition. Watson is an accomplished NFL quarterback. He's had years to develop this kind of processing. He's played in multiple systems. He's got extensive experience reading defenses and making these kinds of subtle decisions. So when a young quarterback like Sanders is making plays that demonstrate this level of sophistication, that's worth noting. That's worth highlighting, because it means he's not just physically gifted. He's not just talented, he's also smart. He's also putting in the work to understand the game at a deeper level. The ball placement to conception is one rep, one throw, one moment in a practice, but it's representative of a pattern that's been showing up across this camp. And patterns matter more than individual plays. Patterns show consistency. Patterns show that something is real rather than a one-off fluke. When you see a young quarterback making intelligent decisions about ball placement repeatedly, when you see him thinking about what happens after the catch, when you see him understanding how his throws affect the rest of the play, that's when you know you're looking at something legitimate. There's also something important about this throw in terms of receiver development. Casey Conception is a young receiver trying to establish himself. And when a quarterback is making plays to him, when a quarterback is putting him in position to succeed, when a quarterback is throwing with touch and placement that allows him to run after the catch, that's how chemistry develops. That's how young receivers develop confidence. That's how an offense starts to click. Sanders is doing this with multiple receivers across camp, which suggests that the offense is starting to build something real. The connections aren't just individual, they're systematic. They're part of a broader pattern of Sanders understanding how to elevate the players around him. Section 4, the fairness factor and honest context, 900 words. Here's what I need to be honest about, because this context matters for understanding the broader conversation happening right now. And I'm saying this as someone who cares about accurate evaluation and fair assessment rather than someone trying to push a particular narrative. My frustration through the recent rep shuffle wasn't really about whether Sanders could ultimately win or lose this competition on pure merit. That's what competition actually means. He could win it outright. He could lose it. Both of those outcomes would be legitimate. Both would say something true about the quarterback battle. But my frustration was specifically about opportunity and how it's being distributed. And this matters because opportunity is the thing you can't manufacture. Talent, you're either born with or you're not. Work ethic, that's something you control. But opportunity, that's something the coaching staff controls. And when you control opportunity, you're essentially controlling the narrative around the competition, whether you mean to or not. Here's what happened. Watson got multiple consecutive days with the starters, extended reps, runway to build rhythm with the first-team offense. Then Sanders got pulled back, completely pulled out of first-team reps, relegated to second-team work while Watson continued to operate with the starters. That by itself sends a message. Then, when Sanders eventually got his reps back, when he finally got to return to first-team work, it was in a no-pads environment. And this is important. No-pads practice is specifically the kind of controlled setting where Watson has historically looked most comfortable throughout his career. Lighter contact means fewer variables. Fewer variables means more rhythm. More rhythm means the offense clicks better. That's just how his game works. So the sequence was, Watson gets extended time with the ones. Sanders gets pulled. Sanders gets reps back, but in the environment most favorable to Watson. That's not neutral. That's not an even testing ground. That's stacking things in a particular direction before the actual competition even really plays out at full intensity. And I say this not as someone trying to claim some grand conspiracy or hidden agenda. I say this as someone observing how rep distribution actually works in professional football. Now, here's what makes today genuinely significant. Even stepping into those conditions, even facing the situation that was structured that way, Sanders came out and had a genuinely strong showing by every legitimate account. He didn't just have good moments hidden among mediocre ones. He had a pattern of good moments. He didn't just convert a few throws. He converted consistently. And that matters because it suggests something real is there. It suggests that the favorable circumstances weren't the determining factor. It suggests that the talent is legitimate enough to show up even when conditions aren't ideal. What's interesting is that I'm not the only one observing this. There's a respected voice on local radio, someone who's actually been critical of Sanders at different points during this camp, and that person specifically pointed out today that Sanders' offense processing was extremely clean. They highlighted the pre-snap adjustments. They acknowledged the accurate deliveries. When somebody who's been openly skeptical starts acknowledging strong fundamentals, that carries weight. It's not coming from an obviously biased source. It's coming from someone who's been willing to call out weaknesses when they see them. But here's the thing that really matters for this broader conversation about fairness and opportunity. The same respected voice also raised a completely legitimate concern worth including here because I'm trying to give you the full picture, not just the parts that support a narrative. They wanted to see more of these strong reps specifically happening with pads on. A lot of what's been impressive lately has come in lighter, no-contact settings. And there's legitimacy to that concern. Training camp can sometimes obscure things. Lighter contact can sometimes make quarterbacks and receivers look better than they are. And I share that same hope heading into Wednesday when Sanders is expected to get his next stretch with the ones in full pads. Winning the day in shorts is good. Winning the day against live contact, against live hitting, against the kind of impact that makes you uncomfortable. That's the next real evaluation point. The fairness factor is worth discussing because it shapes how we interpret what we're seeing. But it's also important not to use fairness as an excuse for underperformance. If Sanders had a bad day today, that would matter regardless of circumstances. The fact that he had a strong day is what matters, and the circumstances just add context to how significant that strong day actually is. It suggests it's real. It suggests it's not just a product of favorable conditions. It suggests that what we're seeing is legitimate quarterback development, not just practice success in a controlled environment. Section 5. The rough patch and complete truth, 900 words. Now I need to be honest about a rougher stretch in today's practice too, because fairness means covering the whole picture, not just the highlight reel and the moments that support a particular narrative. If we're going to talk about what Sanders did well, we also have to talk about what went wrong. Because a complete evaluation requires complete honesty. And there were real issues today that need to be addressed directly. There were genuine pre-snap problems today, and I want to walk through them accurately instead of glossing over them or cherry-picking only the good moments. During a 2-minute drill period with the number 1 offense against the number 1 defense, Sanders had a short completion to Judy. But then immediately after that, the offense hit 3 straight pre-snap penalties in a row. That's not normal. That's not just a random hiccup. That's a pattern of operational breakdown happening in real time. The last one was a false start from Spencer Fano, who was just getting his first real extended run with the starting offensive line. New left tackle. New system. Those things matter. False starts happen. But here's what's important about the context. When the second unit came in with Watson, that group had 2 more consecutive pre-snap penalties of their own. 2 straight penalties. The final one also a false start. And that's actually how the entire practice ended. The coaching staff shut things down after that stretch of penalties. So here's what we have. A 2-minute drill period where pre-snap penalties were affecting both the first-team offense and the second-team offense. Both units. Both quarterbacks under center at different points. Both groups struggling with operational cleanliness in that exact same stretch. This is the part that's genuinely being underreported elsewhere. These penalties weren't isolated to one quarterback's unit. They weren't a Sanders problem or a Watson problem. They were an offensive line problem. They were a system problem. They were a communication problem that was affecting both units equally. And yet, here's what I've observed across this entire camp. There's been a pattern where pre-snap issues involving Watson's unit, specifically, don't always get the same level of public attention as similar issues on Sanders' unit. I'm not sitting here claiming some grand conspiracy or hidden agenda. I'm not suggesting that someone is deliberately trying to undermine one quarterback while promoting another. But it's fair to point out that discrepancy in coverage when I've directly seen video of pre-snap issues happening with Watson's group that simply didn't get the same social media traction or discussion as nearly identical plays involving Sanders. It's worth observing. It's worth acknowledging. It's worth thinking critically about how narratives get shaped around quarterback competitions. Think about it logically for a second. You've got a rookie left tackle going up against genuinely elite pass rushers like Jared Verse in practice every single day. Of course, there are going to be false starts. Of course, there are going to be operational hiccups. That's just the reality of a new system with a completely retooled offensive line. You're learning on the fly, you're adjusting communication, you're figuring out timing and spacing. It doesn't matter which quarterback happens to be standing behind center when it happens. It's just the reality of installing a new offense with new personnel. But when those penalties get highlighted for one quarterback and not for another, when the narrative becomes about one quarterback's struggles with operation, when both quarterbacks' units are having similar issues, then you're looking at selective storytelling. You're looking at a narrative being shaped in a particular direction. And that matters because it affects how people perceive the competition. It affects how the fans talk about it. It affects how the coaching staff might perceive public sentiment around the competition. So when Sanders gets blamed for pre-snap penalties today, it's worth remembering that Watson's unit had the same issues. When Sanders' false starts get highlighted, it's worth remembering that Fauna was just getting his first real run with the starters, and that those same communication issues affected the entire unit regardless of who was at quarterback. These things deserve context. They deserve honesty about what was actually happening versus what's being reported. The rough patch today matters. It's real. It's something Sanders needs to address, but it's also something that deserves to be understood in its complete context. Both units had issues. Both quarterbacks' groups were affected. The offensive line is still getting comfortable. Communication is still being refined. That's all normal for where this team is in the process. What matters is whether these issues get resolved before the preseason games start counting. And what matters is whether these issues are being reported accurately and fairly regardless of which quarterback happens to be involved. Section 6, SCORING and efficiency context, 900 words. Let's get into the actual numbers because I do want to give you that statistical context, even with my reservations about how complete and accurate these trackers really are. Because numbers matter. Stat lines matter. But context around those numbers matters even more. And that's where the real story lives. Sanders finished around 70% completion percentage on the day. Watson finished right around 68%. Now, if you just look at those numbers in isolation, you might think they're basically equivalent. Similar completion percentages. Similar level of efficiency. Both quarterbacks performing at a comparable level. But that's exactly where the incompleteness of raw stat lines becomes a problem. Because those numbers don't tell you the whole story. Those numbers don't tell you what kind of throws were being attempted. Those numbers don't tell you the quality of the defensive looks being faced. Those numbers don't tell you about the rhythm each offense was operating in. The starting offense, the one that Sanders was working with, was facing the number one defense. The most prepared defense. The defense with the best schemes and the best preparation. That's not the same as facing the second-team defense. It's not the same level of difficulty. It's not the same quality of competition. So when Sanders is completing 70% against the first-team defense while also face better talent at every position, that number means something different than if he was facing lesser competition. And yes, both units had similar issues with pre-snap penalties across both groups as well. But what separated Sanders was in the scoring column. More touchdowns on the day, working with the starting offense against the tougher defensive look, doing it efficiently. That's where the distinction actually matters. That's where you see the real difference in performance. Touchdowns matter. Scoring matters. Red zone efficiency matters. And in those categories, Sanders was clearly ahead. Now let's also acknowledge the other quarterbacks getting work today because they deserve credit too. Dillon Gabriel had a more modest day, 5 of 8 for right around 56%. That's not an impressive stat line, but it's also important to remember that Gabriel is in a different position in this competition. He's not competing for the starting job the way Sanders and Watson are. He's competing for depth. He's trying to earn a spot on the roster. That context matters. Those are different pressures, different expectations. And I do want to give a quick shout out to rookie quarterback Taylon Green too, because he's not getting much attention in these breakdowns, and that's worth acknowledging even in a competition that's completely dominated by the top two names. Green is just a rookie trying to learn the system, trying to get comfortable in the NFL, trying to prove he belongs. And when you're that far down the depth chart, you don't get the same opportunities as the guys competing for the starting job. That's just how it works. Now, I also want to highlight a couple of throws from Watson today because credit belongs where it's earned, and I'm not here to pretend he didn't have good moments. Because he did. Watson absolutely had moments that showed why he's an accomplished NFL quarterback. There's a completion to Cedric Tillman that was slightly underthrown, but Tillman still made the play work. It wasn't a perfect throw, but it was a throw that showed Watson's willingness to be aggressive. I actually liked that Watson let it loose rather than playing it safe and checking it down. Sometimes in practice, you have to cut it loose and live with the outcome. You have to see if your receivers can make plays. And Tillman making that play is a real sign he's building a legitimate connection with this quarterback room. There was also a completion to rookie receiver Jalen Noel working over the middle, showing real chemistry developing there. That's important because receiver development is about reps and connection. It's about trust between quarterback and receiver. When Watson is throwing to Noel and creating these moments, when Noel is making those plays, that's chemistry building. That's an offense getting better. That matters. And there's a nice connection to Gage Larvadain that's worth noting too. These connections to different receivers across the field show that Watson is also doing quarterback things well today. He's getting the ball to different people. He's building chemistry with multiple weapons. He's not just tunnel vision on one or two guys. That's good quarterback work. That's the kind of thing that helps an offense function. So when we talk about the numbers and the context around them, it's important to say, both quarterbacks had good moments. Both quarterbacks showed competence. Both quarterbacks demonstrated they can play this position at a functional level, but Sanders was more consistent. Sanders had a clearer day of command. Sanders was more decisive in how he moved through progressions. Sanders was better in the red zone. Those are the differentiators. Those are the things that separated today's performance. And those are the things that matter when you're talking about a real quarterback competition. Section 7, the competitive dynamic, 900 words. Here's my honest, bigger picture take on all of this, and I want to be direct about it because this is actually important for understanding what's really happening in Cleveland right now. I'm genuinely happy Watson is playing well, and I mean that sincerely. I'm not saying it to seem balanced or to hedge my bets. I'm saying it because I actually believe it's true, and it matters. Here's why that matters. At the highest levels of competition, when the guy across from you is also performing at a high level, it forces you to be sharper too. That's not theory. That's not motivational poster stuff. That's the actual truth about how elite-level competition works. There's a reason that world-class runners talk about training with people faster than themselves. It forces you to push past your own comfortable pace. It forces you to find things inside yourself that you didn't know were there. It forces growth in ways that comfortable competition simply can't. If Watson had been playing down to a significantly lower level this entire camp, if he was struggling, if he was making mistakes, if he was clearly outmatched, it would be a lot easier to dismiss Sanders' success as simply dominating a lesser competitor. You could say, well, of course Sanders looks good. He's up against someone who's not competing at the same level. It would be easier to explain away the performance. It would be easier to suggest that when Sanders actually faces real competition, when he actually faces a starting-level NFL quarterback doing starting-level things, he'll fall back to earth. But that's not what's happening here. Watson is playing well. Watson is performing at a competitive level. Watson is doing genuine quarterback things and showing why he's an accomplished player in this league. And in that context, Sanders is outpacing him. Sanders is being more decisive. Sanders is having more big moments. Sanders is being more efficient in the red zone. Sanders is separating himself in the categories that matter most. And that says a lot more about where Sanders actually stands in this battle than if the bar in front of him had been lower the whole time. There's actually a principle in psychology and performance science about this. When you're trying to reach your potential, you need to be pushed by people who are also reaching their potential. You need to be challenged by people who are legitimately challenging you. Because otherwise, you start to think you're better than you actually are. You start to get comfortable. You start to plateau. But when you're competing against someone who's legitimately good, someone who's actually performing at a high level, then you have to elevate yourself just to stay in the conversation. And that's what makes today so significant. It's not just that Sanders had a good day. It's that Sanders had a good day against real competition. It's that Sanders had a good day while being evaluated side by side with Deshaun Watson, an NFL veteran who's proven he can play this position at the professional level. That context makes the performance more meaningful. That context makes the success more legitimate. That context suggests that what we're seeing is real quarterback growth, not just practice success against inferior competition. Now, there's also something worth noting about Watson's perspective in all of this. Watson knows what he's doing out there. Watson understands the system. Watson has years of professional experience, and yet Sanders is keeping pace. Sanders is matching his efficiency. Sanders is being more decisive in certain areas. Sanders is building better timing with receivers. From Watson's perspective, that has to be motivating or frustrating or some combination of both. Because he's not getting the separation that maybe he expected. He's not pulling away from a young quarterback the way a veteran with his experience might anticipate. For Sanders, the competitive dynamic is similarly significant. He's proving that he belongs in this conversation. He's proving that he's not just a first-round pick riding on draft capital. He's proving through actual performance that he can compete at the professional level. He's proving that he can make throws that matter. He's proving that he can process an offense. He's proving that he can win moments. And he's doing it against someone who's legitimately accomplished. That's the environment where real growth happens. The competitive dynamic between these two quarterbacks is actually healthy for the organization, because it means the coaching staff gets to see who performs better when things matter. It means they get to make a decision based on actual performance rather than just historical track record or draft position. It means they get to see which quarterback rises to the occasion when the stakes are real. And that's the entire point of a training camp competition. That's why these camps exist. That's why quarterbacks get these opportunities to prove themselves. And what we're seeing is a genuinely competitive situation where both guys are bringing their best, and one is separating himself through performance. Section 8, What's Coming and the Real Test, 900 words. So where does this leave things heading into the rest of the week? And what's actually important about what comes next? Because today was a good day for Sanders, but good days in no pads practice don't define quarterback competitions. Real competition gets defined in full pad situations. Real evaluation happens when there's live contact. Real decisions get made when consequences are on the line. Wednesday brings Sanders back with the ones in full pads, which is genuinely the next real proving ground that everyone, myself included, wants to see. And this matters for specific reasons. No pads practice is controlled. No pads practice is clean. No pads practice is rhythm-oriented. Full pads practice is chaos. Full pads practice is contact. Full pads practice is impact. When you have pads on, when there are defenders hitting you, when there's actually consequences to being in the wrong spot at the wrong time, the game changes. The pressure changes. The decision-making happens faster. The margins for error get thinner. This is where the legitimate concern raised by the respected voice on local radio becomes really relevant. They wanted to see more of these strong reps specifically happening with pads on, and that's fair. That's legitimate. Because a lot of what's been impressive lately has come in lighter, no-contact settings. And training camp can sometimes obscure things. Lighter contact can sometimes make quarterbacks look better than they actually are. It can make receivers look more open than they are. It can make timing look cleaner than it is. So when you move to full pads, when you add contact into the equation, sometimes things change. The question for Sanders is whether the processing he showed today, whether the decision-making, whether the accuracy, whether the efficiency, whether all of that holds up when defenders are actually hitting him, when he has to move in the pocket while someone's grabbing his jersey, when he has to release the ball while getting hit, when receivers are running routes against physical coverage. That's the real test. That's what separates a prospect from a professional. And from the coaching staff's perspective, that's what they actually need to see. They need to see whether Sanders can maintain his level of play when conditions change. They need to see whether his processing is so solid that it holds up under pressure. They need to see whether his mechanics break down when he's uncomfortable or whether he maintains throwing form even when things are chaotic. These are the things that matter in real games. These are the things that separate good quarterbacks from great ones. But it's not just about Sanders. The operational cleanliness across the entire offensive line, regardless of which quarterback is under center, clearly needs real work before these preseason games start counting. And that's the other thing about Wednesday. It's not just a test for Sanders. It's a test for the whole offense. It's a test for the new offensive line to see if they can execute properly with pads on. It's a test for the receivers to see if they can create separation against contact. It's a test for the entire system to see if it functions the way the coaching staff designed it to function. The pre-snap penalties today were concerning, not because they happened, because that happens in training camp, but because they happened across both units. That suggests there's a communication or timing issue that affects the entire offense. That's something that needs to get fixed, and it needs to get fixed before the preseason games start. You can't have that many procedural penalties in real games. The margins are too small. The games are too decided by field position and momentum. Now, there's also the broader framework that's still being finalized. The joint practices against Buffalo are still coming. The rep distribution is still being adjusted. The first 2 preseason games are still ahead, and all of that will play a role in how this competition actually gets decided. But Wednesday's practice with full pads is the next checkpoint. It's the next opportunity to see where things actually stand. It's the next chance for both quarterbacks to prove something real. The public trackers and reporting around this competition continue to be something worth engaging with critically, rather than accepting at total face value. Especially when context keeps getting stripped out of individual plays and stat lines. Because what you see on tape sometimes tells a different story than what gets reported on social media or what gets highlighted in these trackers. So be critical. Watch the tape yourself. Form your own opinions. Don't just accept the narratives that get pushed out there. Because narratives can be shaped in particular directions, and that's worth understanding when you're trying to evaluate what's actually happening. The bottom line is this: Sanders had an impressive day today, a genuinely impressive day that showed real quarterback development and real potential. But it was one day in a no-pads environment, one day in a controlled setting. The real test comes Wednesday. The real evaluation comes when there's contact. The real competition gets decided in the preseason games. Today matters, but it's not the full story. Wednesday matters more. And the preseason games matter most. That's the journey we're on, and that's what we're going to be following as this competition develops. Conclusion, 200 words. What happened on day 11 of Brown's training camp wasn't just another practice performance. It was a statement about where Shedeur Sanders actually stands in this quarterback competition. A young quarterback who's being tested against real competition, facing unfavorable circumstances, and still showing up with elite-level processing and decision-making. That matters. That suggests something real is there. But one great day in no-pads practice doesn't decide a competition. Full pads practice is coming. Preseason games are coming. Real evaluation is still ahead. The question now is whether Sanders can maintain this level of play when conditions change, when contact gets added, when the margin for error gets smaller. That's the next test. That's what comes next Wednesday. For Watson, the message is clear. A young quarterback is keeping pace with you. For the coaching staff, the message is equally clear. This competition is genuine. It's real. Both quarterbacks can play. The decision will come down to who performs better under pressure, who makes better decisions when it matters most, who elevates his teammates better when games are on the line. That's the story of this quarterback competition. That's where we are right now, and everything that happens from Wednesday forward will be about answering those questions. Stay tuned.